Welcome to Behavioral Grooves. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. Behavioral Grooves is the global podcast that shares conversations with behavioral science researchers who have cool ideas, practitioners who have outstanding applications, and accidental behavioral scientists who put all the best thinking into their work, but just without the behavioral science terminology. And we do it by having a lot of fun, don't we, Kurt?
Well, I know I have a lot of fun. Not quite sure about you, but I do. And it's also always easier to have fun when we have a bright and sarcastic guest like we did today.
Oh, absolutely. And in this episode, we share a conversation with Tara Austin, who is a strategist by trade and was recently the chief strategy officer for Kindred in London. Now, many of us know her for her public speaking events, like her presentation at Nudgestock earlier this year, and the amazing work that she's done with Rory Sutherland and Sam Tatam and Jez Groom while she was at Ogilvy over the years.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about some of her greatest hits because they are quite noteworthy. But before we get to our conversation with Tara, we just want to plant a seed with you.
Yes, we do, Kurt. We started this podcast nearly 4 years ago, and Kurt and I have been funding it ourselves. We don't have any advertisers, and we've never had a big corporate sponsor that takes care of all of our expenses.
Expenses like the fees for website design, transcription, hosting, publishing, licensing for recording and editing software, and well, then there's our time. Tim and I invest probably around 8 to 10 hours in each episode, and we do it because we love it. Even after more than 160 episodes, we are doing this because we absolutely love this.
We do. And we'd like to ask you to join the others who are supporting us with our Patreon subscription. For less than the cost of one latte per month.
One latte per month?
Latte per month. You can be a subscriber that supports Behavioral Grooves. And we'd like to encourage you to zip right out to www.patreon.com/behavioral grooves and find a plan that fits your budget. You don't have to join at the $100 a month level. No, not even the $24 a month level. But surely $6 a month wouldn't even break a sweat on a COVID account.
Zip right out. Oh, love your terminology, Tim. All right. Yes, and we would appreciate your support and encourage you to check out the options right now. However, if you would rather spend your time leaving us a review, we're good with that as well. Just scroll down to the bottom of your podcast app and give us a quick one. Tell us what you like about the podcast. No need to feel like you need to be all fancy, wordy and stuff. You know, you can use words like zip or groovy or dig it. You know, Tim would love that. Just share a couple of words from your heart. That's all that we ask.
So with that, Kurt, let's sit back with our lateral thinking cocktail and listen to our conversation with the very engaging Tara Austin. Tara Austin, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Hello, fellow primates. Nice to meet you.
I like that, fellow primates. All right. Tim, are you going to start with the theater on this time? Here we go.
Yeah, let's get started. So, the viewers can't, or listeners can't see this, but we saw you drinking out of what appears to be some kind of a cup. And we're wondering, is it coffee or tea?
It is tea. I'm drinking tea today.
Okay.
All right. Would you prefer to have dinner with your favorite sports star, TV star, or musician?
Musician every time. I don't have a favorite sports star either, so that was an easy one.
No fun actor or actress that you would like to do instead? Who would the musician be? Let's go there. So it's supposed to be a speed round, but we're digging in.
Okay, right. Oh gosh, you get me off on one now. It's got to be Dolly Parton. Absolutely.
Oh
wow.
Oh yeah.
We'd love to meet her.
Fantastic. Yeah.
She is a interesting and I mean deeper person than I had ever known. Knowing her from like growing up, and Dolly had her thing going on that wasn't necessarily my thing, but man, I love what she's done. So
Dolly, if you're listening, I really want you to do a cover of Human by the Killers. I tried to put it on an ad for Dove once, and the Killers denied me that pleasure. They wouldn't let us synchronize it for Dove ad, but I've always thought Dolly's voice singing that song would be really something else.
We'll just pass it on the next time we talk to her.
That's lateral.
Yeah, when we talk with Dolly next time, we'll just say, "Hey, by the way, you got to think about."
She would make a great guest, though. Man, she's such a bright bulb. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's keep going at the speed round. So, would you prefer to be expert in a new language or expert on a new instrument?
I would prefer an instrument. I own a harp, and I cannot yet properly play it. So, if you could get me learning how to play that, I would be very happy.
All right.
Okay.
All right. So last speed round. So in order to stop vandalism, should shop owners paint pictures of cute babies on their shop fronts or stormtroopers? What would be the better solution
Cute
there?
babies all the way. And we have the evidence, although I would love to see what stormtroopers might do.
Come on, that stormtrooper is fearing. I mean, I'm not going to vandalize this. That power comes in. What? So actually, this goes to some of the work that you did with painting babies on actual, the metal shutters that go down in front of shops. So tell us a little bit about that project.
So back in 2011, London experienced something that the council referred to when I worked with them as the summer disturbances, but everyone else referred to it as the London Riots. And it was very, very disturbing time for everybody, particularly as people were they were burning down the pub that they drank in. They were looting from the shop where they bought their newspaper. They weren't rioting in Mayfair. They were rioting in their own neighborhoods and destroying local businesses in the process. And so it was very disturbing. And I got a little insight into the town planning process from a magazine called The Grocer, which usually has headlines such as "Cheese, a big month for cheese." But the editor of The Grocer wrote a very interesting editorial suggesting that the government needed to relax the planning laws and it needed to allow small little greengrocers and places like this to install shop security shutters. And up until that point, I hadn't realized that shop shutters were such a kind of social ill, that they were there in plain sight, and yet they had a subconscious influence on me and my thinking about a particular area. They pointed out that it's actually quite difficult in England to install shutters and get planning permission for that because they make areas darker because they don't reflect the light anymore off the glass. I think Manchester Town Council declared them a danger to women, which seems sort of ridiculous and hyperbolic. But the truth is that places where the shutters come down are places where crime is present, and everyone recognizes that, and people feel afraid, and so it is having this impact. I'm sure all of your listeners will be very familiar with the idea of and it's very much contested, but the broken windows theory from Mayor Giuliani in New York. The idea that the visible signal of the presence of crime in an area meant that people didn't look after the area and things like this, and places deteriorated. But shutters do the same thing, and it struck me reading this editorial that part of the problem, part of the reason that people had rioted in the first place was because they didn't care about these places. They didn't recognize actually within that shop that they just looted was a human being with a business and a family and something that they ought to really kind of care about. And the very idea of shutters being sort of dehumanizing, saying, yes, there's crime here, but they also say, you might be a criminal too. You're not welcome. Kind of bugger off. And I, at the same time, had a totally different experience of shop shutters, which was an artist called Ben Eine had painted a series of shutters on the seafront of my hometown in Hastings. Really beautiful sort of pastel colours, big letters that he painted onto them. His kind of signature piece. And these shutters are big, relatively flat media surfaces that had been painted in this beautiful way that was enhancing the area that was, the way you might think about graffiti, something that, or street art, a mural. And so I kind of put these two things together and sort of thought to myself, right, well, these shopkeepers need to protect their shops. They can't install shutters very easily, but when they're there, they're having this powerful negative consequence. And at the same time, people need to care more about their local environment. Why don't we paint these shop shutters in some interesting way? At the same time, I was working for the Ogilvy Group as a strategist, and we were setting up what was then called Ogilvy Change. It's now part of Ogilvy Consulting, but was the behavioural science practice within Ogilvy, led by Rory Sutherland and Jez Groom. And we were it was sort of growing out of the business. And for launch, I declared we were going to run our first ever experiment, which was to paint the faces of local babies onto shop security shutters in order to bring down antisocial behaviour in the area and try and stimulate people to care more about that place. Because first and foremost, the shutters were having this negative impact. But then we also stumbled across some interesting insight showing into something called the baby schema. And the baby schema is the proportion of infant faces that make them look infant and cute. It's sometimes called sort of like the cute effect. Big cheeks, big round eyes, small features. It's the Disney proportions. Anything that looks a bit cute has these kind of proportions. So a mini car has high baby schema. A pug dog has high baby schema. And some researchers, Melanie Glocker and co. at the universities of Pennsylvania and Munster, I think is how you say it, had done some research in 2009, which had proven that cute really matters to the brain. The original theory by this terrible sort of Nazi called Konrad Lorenz into the baby schema started back in the 40s. But in 2009, Melanie Glocker sort of proved, putting people into scanners and things, that seeing cute images and seeing high baby schema stimulates part of the brain that encourages nurturing behaviors, which is sort of unsurprising, you might say. But they kind of proved that cute matters to the brain. And the long-winded way of saying that is that we wanted to paint faces onto the shutters to get people to care a little bit more when they're in the vicinity, even at a very, very subconscious priming level. Could it have an effect? And I'm sort of pleased to say it did. It did seemingly have an effect. And an incredible man called Wing Commander Keith Deere, who specializes in watching eyes theory, because babies also have eyes. He did a longitudinal study when he was at Oxford, and showed that there was, at the very least, there was some displacement of crime from the area of the parade where we had painted the shutters. And that we subsequently got some funding to run a similar experiment in Ealing Council, but this time with photographic images of children rather than graffiti, which was a little bit difficult to sort of rely on. But yes, so I would say babies, not stormtroopers, or alternatively, very cute puppies, you know? So
very cute puppies.
I wouldn't rule out anything with high baby schema.
All right. So those big eyes, small other features, those other things. So when you're doing this, obviously you ran into some issues with city council and ordinances and various different things, but it's this idea of having these metal shutters that come down that are protecting the shops from people breaking in, and yet it actually impacted that because it signaled that this was a bad area and maybe you're a bad person. And so in those riots and various different pieces, but by painting these pictures on, you were able to show that decreased some of the antisocial behavior that was going on. Is that kind of... And
there was a lot of even without the kind of quantitative data, which we have now, the qualitative stuff was lovely. So, you know, the shopkeepers weren't having their shop urinated on. And this is right next to the taxi rank, I should say, 24 hour. So, you know, you're not coming to work in the morning and having a, unpleasant experience because nobody's going to piss on a baby's face. If you're going to do it, you're going to go and do it somewhere else. And so I'm not saying that antisocial behavior wasn't displaced. I don't have the data on that. But I am saying if you don't want antisocial behavior to happen on your doorstep, then there's something that you can probably do to move that away. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating.
I want to go back to part of the story that fascinates me, of course, is the creativity, right, and the innovation of putting all this together. But you kind of teed up this idea that in Hastings, you had seen Ben Eine's work. And how and it, to me, it almost sounds like a prime. Right. It wasn't a prompt. It wasn't there with it that you instantly said, oh, my gosh, this is what I have to do. It kind of ladled in your unconscious for some time. And I'm wondering how long had it been that you first saw Ben Eine's work before you started to put this together, Tara, for the Babies of the Borough?
It was a fair few months, actually. Yeah, it was probably 4 or 5 months later. Making the connection. But I mean, first things first, it was let's paint these shutters. Let's paint some shutters and see if we can have an effect and make people care about the area. And then there was the secondary layer of what are we going to paint on them? Okay, let's paint the babies. We did explore some other options. So we were looking at, for example, watching eyes theory, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, but the idea that surveillance changes behavior, which it does. And, there's lots of experimentation now around angry eyes and bicycle thieves. Beware, we are watching you. Wing Commander Keith sort of specializes in that. But we decided that would be far too Orwellian. I had this lovely notion that we could paint the iris of the shopkeeper onto the shutter and just take a really beautiful photo and then paint that precisely their iris, that kind of fingerprint but also but of course, and I think it would have looked stunning, and I would love to do that somewhere. I think it would be a great experiment to see what people think of it. But yeah, too Orwellian. So instead we tried to get kind of close proximity to the audience as well. We made sure that they were local babies, which was actually the hardest part of the whole thing, was recruiting local babies. But using the baby.
You could have just done cute stormtroopers,
baby
Yoda. Can you do a baby stormtrooper?
Baby Yodas would work. There we go.
Baby Yodas would work. There you go.
I was just fascinated with how this creative process, and I think it's interesting that you started with this. Okay, we're going to paint something. Now, what are we going to paint?
Yeah.
Again, that's just sort of one of those, you pushed off from the shore without knowing exactly what direction you were going to be in.
Yeah. And we reviewed a bunch of literature, and those were but I think babies kind of won out. Also, as I say, babies have eyes. So it was a sort of double whammy of,
right.
I think it's called is it a Lollapalooza effect or something, where you have these things sort of amplifying one another. And I think in a lot of great, I'm saying it's great, but great behavioral interventions, you can't extract necessarily just one principle. It's not just scarcity, it's also anchoring. And it's also, the Ogilvy team in Australia did a great piece of work for KFC. They inadvertently encouraged a lot of people to buy chips, which kind of contradicted the work we were doing on like Public Health England and everything. But such is the private sector. But they did a really interesting piece of work where they used the short story is they used a proposition, a frame for $1 chips, where they said maximum 4 per peeps, maximum 4 per person, and that was sort of elevating what had been a disclaimer to make it the campaign essentially. And people went crazy for this, and they bought loads and loads and loads of chips. And you could say, okay, it's because they're in limited supply, scarcity. But equally, there's an anchoring piece, even perhaps a social norming piece there around. It's 4. 4 is the maximum you can buy, but maybe everyone else is buying 4 as well. And I think pretty much any intervention that you look at in the real world, outside of the lab, and this is where I've sort of built my career, I suppose, has been applied behavioral science, far from academic. But there are these factors that all work together and combine together to kind of hopefully have the result that you're looking for.
Yeah, fantastic. So Tara, you are a big fan of Edward de Bono.
De Bono fangirl.
Yes, yeah, there you go. So help us understand what this fan kind of thing is, and why, and what is so important about, his six hats, thinking different colored hats.
So de Bono coined the term lateral thinking, and he's written, I think it's something like 87 books, many of which
classic underachiever.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, the funny thing is, I spoke at the Nudgestock conference where we first connected about the fact that he's never been I think, really awarded or highly awarded enough for his work. And
he was nominated. He was nominated for a Nobel.
Yeah, he was nominated. But I think you have to be nominated a few times in order to actually get it. And I made the case, terribly poignantly, that we are all in awe of Daniel Kahneman. But of course, Amos Tversky worked alongside him on prospect theory and many other great pieces of research and contributed towards the field and the world. But Amos never got the Nobel Prize because he died, and you can't win it posthumously. And that seems something of a tragedy to me. And without putting too fine a point on it, De Bono is in his later years of life. And I certainly just don't feel he's got the recognition he deserves, because it was way back in sort of 1967 when he wrote Mechanism of Mind. I think he really anticipated much of what we now know from modern neuroscience are the underlying features of creativity and creative thinking, of how we make connections in the brain. And he really did anticipate that. And with lateral thinking, he gave a new language to it. There were other people who had voiced or talked about creativity, and all of them are talking about the same fundamental mechanisms, if you like. But I think he really consolidated thinking around creative thought. And he gave us some really interesting techniques. And this is the thing, people often think of creativity as like the muse strikes you. But it's just not as simple as that. And there are techniques that you can use to make yourself more creative, to force creativity. And my business really has been doing that, has been extracting creativity from people. And so I became, a few years ago, really sort of dedicated to De Bono, got trained up in teaching others about his techniques. And I'm all-round fan, I suppose you could say.
I'd say it's more of a crush.
Well, I don't know. I'm looking for a considerably younger man, if I'm honest.
Fair enough. But in the Six Thinking Hats, he talks about he categorizes different types of thinking with different colored hats.
Yeah.
And for those who aren't familiar with the thesis, would you mind just sharing a little bit about and then let's zero in on
all the hats, because I don't train the hats. The hats but there are two hats in particular that I do use. Because because if you use the full suite of hats, it's all about how to decision-making processes, how to analyze a problem, how to break it down, how to collaborate around it. But it's a kind of business thinking technique. Whereas I use two of the hats specifically in creative and lateral thinking workshops. So two hats, I have them here. I have a green hat and a black hat, and I've got physical hats because for the listeners, there are two hats in front of me, and I use them in workshops because if somebody's effectively being naughty, and they are wearing the black hat, and I make them wear it, because then it's a very powerful disincentive to do it again. So when someone is wearing the black hat, they are judging the situation. The black hat of judgment. And it means that in the context of a workshop, someone might be saying, well, there's no way we could do that. That's cost too much money. We haven't got enough time. Anything at all that is detracting from the idea, judging the idea as not possible, or anything about it. In fact, you can also I have asked people to wear the black hat if they've got a bit too over enthusiastic about an idea as well, because equally that is judgment. This is it. This is the idea. This is amazing. And the reason for that is that the purpose of the workshop is not to wear the black hat. The purpose is to wear the green hat. And the green hat is the hat of creativity, of lateral thinking, of making connections in the mind and moving on. So the point with lateral thinking is, unlike a vertical judgment-based way of thinking, instead of coming to an idea and then going, great, we've got it, we've got it in the bank. Lateral thinking is about being really prolific, coming up with as many ideas as you possibly can in the time that you can, and forcing that. And that means, yes, coming up with idea after idea after idea. And later, you wear the black hat. Outside the workshop, when it comes to another point in time, you can wear the black hat and you can make those judgments. What is and isn't relevant, and what do we need to change about this? But you can't run a successful creative exercise and really maximize your potential for creativity if you are in a judgment kind of mindset.
And isn't lateral thinking too, from my understanding, and again, I have not read De Bono since the 90s probably, so I am not as up to him, but I have. I mean, he hasn't changed anything. There you go. If I could remember it correctly, it would be just perfect. But we know that. But lateral thinking to me too was always this idea, and what I appreciated about him is it's not like just formulating ideas down that same path. Like if you're going down this road and oh, here's another idea and we're just going right down this path on these ideas. It's saying, look, let's take a sharp left or a sharp right from this path and go off into these weird areas that may have nothing to do at all with what that path or where that path is going. So it gives us these different ideas. And again, as you said, when you come back into that judgmental, that black hat thinking, that there is this time to spur those, but it could create these other ideas. That was part of what I had, and maybe I misconstrued that from something else, but is that part of this?
That's absolutely it. And actually, so the stimulus that De Bono uses, like his most famous lateral thinking technique is the random word technique. The word has to be random for it to work. And that's because everybody thinks that they know the answer to a problem. If I ask you anything at all, you will instantly, your mind will go to, well, that's an answer. And that answer is typically lots of money, a new computer system, a new technology, a really fancy, whizzy way of doing something. And it's usually prohibitively expensive, or how are we going to solve crime? I know, we're going to pay for more policemen. Nobody's saying, let's paint some shutters. But actually, there are solutions. De Bono says our thinking is excellent, but is not enough. And if we want to move outside of the area of the obvious, and that might be the right answer, then you need to kind of push beyond that. And you need to force new pathways in the mind, force new concepts. And so providing something like a random word, a truly random word, will open up a new pathway in the brain that just wasn't there before and allow you to, you just have to connect that back to your problem. Yeah. I think on a Nudgestock call, I asked people to use a random word in order to solve the problem of getting people to wear face masks in stores. And I think someone had snake or something, and they thought about those kind of dangly things that come down from the ceiling, like sort of little wavy, I guess almost like a curtain. And actually, when you go into the shop, you have to go through this thing, and you don't want to kind of almost like touch it. So you have to be wearing your mask. It's like a visible curtain thing that you have to pass through. And I thought there's something interesting that you could take it somewhere else. I remember I ran a workshop for the National Citizen Service in the UK, and we were trying to. It's a program for young people where they have to turn up as for a couple of weeks in the summer holidays and do this kind of national citizen thing. And they had a real problem with attrition and dropout rate, because 16-year-olds just go, I'm just going to stay in bed, whatever. I'm not going to show up. And how to get them to show up. And the CEO actually had the word IKEA. And because it could be anything, like, and sometimes I give people, I say, like, how would Mel B solve this problem? How would Putin solve this problem? And just opening up a completely different pathway that you might think about the problem.
I'm sorry, but Spice Girls and Putin in the same phrase just just kind of blew my mind, right? So he had the word IKEA. How would IKEA solve this problem? And he had two answers that seemed fairly straightforward, but not very interesting, frankly. And then the last one, he went, and then I was just thinking, IKEA, building blocks. What if we gave everyone a thing that it was just a part of something, and they had to show up on the day to assemble this thing. And if they didn't show up, they would know that a piece would be missing, and they would be missing. Now, in the behavioral sciences, we'd call that a commitment device. We'd spent all day talking about behavioral science principles, but that wasn't what got us to that conversation. What got us to that conversation was IKEA. Now, the beautiful thing about great lateral thinking is that everything makes sense in retrospect. Everything ties up. The idea makes sense. Ding,
But
hindsight,
hindsight, exactly. You have to get there. You have to get there first. I mean, can you imagine? It seems like inconceivable now that there was no guest checkout button on websites back in the days. All of these kinds of innovations, which made millions, I mean billions of pounds for what I think was Costco, or one of the big retailers that did it first, made so much money for them because people were dropping out otherwise. And it seems really bloody obvious in retrospect, but it wasn't at the time. And that's what lateral thinking is intended to get you to, that place where you everything makes sense and you've got that one brilliant idea that you need, but you just have to be really, really prolific in order to get there. And you have to be willing to kind of open up these new pathways in the mind and think, yeah, how would Mel B or Putin solve this problem? You'd be surprised how much that can help you. And the proof really is in the pudding. I mean, the proof is in the doing of it. I can talk all day about I've got graphs and things about this stuff, but actually getting people to do it. I ran a workshop. My sister was setting up a business, and we had a little family workshop around the dinner table one day because she wanted to name her business. And so I gave everyone a random word, and we came up with a fantastic name for her. And we generated, I don't know, maybe 120 names in the space of 15 minutes or so.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Wow. I don't know. So 120, but there were only 10 of us or something. But
it was a lot, right? Wow. So let's take lateral thinking to another project, right? So don't mess with Texas.
I wish that was my project. I've just got the mug. I just got the merchandise. That's it. But I was saying to you guys that I think it's probably arguably one of the greatest behavioral science campaigns of all time, and it's truly in that intersection of campaign and communications as intervention and narrative as nudge, if you like. I have to talk about nudges and narratives because people tend to think of nudges as procedural or choice architecture, physical things. They don't necessarily think about the nudge narrative or the language, the framing that is going to help someone to think that's a good idea or that's a bad idea. And Don't Mess with Texas is definitely, I have one other campaign that's my favorite as well, but it's right up there because it's been enormous. It's so successful in terms of it was developed, I think in the 70s to reduce littering on the side of the road in Texas, which was a real problem. And there's obviously millions of different approaches you could take to that problem. But what they decided to do was employ some sort of Dallas Cowboys to star in a TV campaign where they were on the side of the road picking up litter, and they kind of crushed the can in their hands, and they were really mad with the people that were throwing the litter out of their truck windows. And this is the problem. The people who were doing that were big, burly, lorry truck driving guys from Texas, very strong identity, not aligned with the kind of free loving, look after the planet, maybe more hippie sort of type movement. So what they did was create a campaign that went with that identity instead of challenging it in any way, by coming up with this line, don't mess with Texas. And the Cowboys said they crushed the can, don't mess with Texas. And this campaign became so successful and it was so taken to the heart of the Texan people that it features on the road signs still on the side of the roads in Texas, but it features on things like my mug or many a t-shirt I'm sure is sold over there because it's something that people were really able to kind of get behind and embrace as their own, and that social norming behavior around this is equally as powerful. So it's a favorite. My other favorite, if you want to know, is jaywalking. It's also an American invention. There we go. So jaywalking, until the invention of the motor car, the street belonged to everybody. And then in the 20s, these evil motorists came along and started mowing people down. And every day the headlines in the papers were mother and children slaughtered by motorists. And the North American Motor Association thought, this is very bad for business. We've got to do something about this. And so we've got to get these pesky pedestrians off the street.
Of course, that would be their solution. Not
exactly.
Let's make the cars safer. Let's get people out of the way.
Exactly. And so if you're talking about this in England, I have to clarify it for people that a J meant at the time a sort of country bumpkin and an idiot who wasn't familiar with the sophisticated ways of the city. And people are extremely sensitive to injunctive norms, moral norms, or shaming norms. And so they invented this word, jaywalking. And then it was an ad campaign that did it. They put up posters, they put up ads in the newspapers. They even, how's this for activation? They put up gravestones somewhere for Mr. J Walker, and they did all this stuff to get people off the street and onto the pavement. And just by having this language, there's something called the Sapphire War Hypothesis, which argues that we are sort of linguistically determined. The language you have frames our thinking, and that in turn frames our behavior. And I think jaywalking is a really great example of that in terms of shifting people towards a certain behavior and away from something that is sensitive, socially sensitive, and so it might be socially shaming. That's probably my all-time favorite. Yeah. The Australians, by the way, are really good at using injunctive norming in their public service kind of campaigns. Most other nations are afraid of it because, and I've worked with government for years, and historically people were always a bit nervous of, we don't want to have a negative campaign. We don't want to make people feel shameful about, doing a bad behavior. Well, that's exactly what you want to do, because you want them to feel good about, doing the right behavior. The Australians aren't like that because they're just much tougher, and a lot of their advertising contains humor. So they've produced things like Dumb Ways to Die, which is an injunctive social norming campaign, but it's funny and it's cute, and you get the message that you'd be an idiot to go onto the train tracks and die that way. They also produced a fantastic campaign, which is called the Pinky campaign, which features young drivers driving too fast, young men, very dangerous problem. And again, recognizing that social shame was one of the few things that might encourage young men not to do this behavior, they had a campaign which, for the listeners, involved a lot of women holding up their little finger and making a little gesture as if to say, this boy who's driving too fast has a very small penis. It's like, and so they held up their little pinky finger, and it became known as the Pinky campaign. And it was all about undermining and socially shaming young men for dangerous driving behaviors. And it's still, it's, again, taken to heart in Australia. But again, because there's a sort of humor to it, there's a fun to that. But yeah, very successful technique that you can use there.
Well, Australians have such a wonderful slang vocabulary that brings that out just naturally too, the way that they talk about things. And I used to have an Australian employee, and I was always amazed, and now I can't remember any of the specifics, but it fits with that persona of what we think about.
Okay, I want to talk about Dolly Parton. If you're going to have dinner with Dolly Parton, what's the first question you're going to ask her?
Oh gosh, I'm being interviewed about interviewing. This is meta. What do I ask?
We are nothing but meta here at Behavioral Grooves.
What do I want to ask Dolly? I just favorite gig. Well, why and favorite music star that you've performed with. Give me the juice, Dolly, is what I'd say. Come on, give me the gossip. I want to hear. I want to hear it. Well, my mother is a singer, and my father ran a record label, set up a record label. So I'm sure I'd come up with some interesting questions for her.
What kind of music did your dad produce on his label?
Everything. It's called Beggar's Banquet, and it's a sort of meta label now. It's a label of labels. But he will argue that they started the indie music scene because they set up sort of micro labels for things like goth music and indie music, or I think it was like, is it the Cult? They did all this kind of punk music. And my dad has a gold record, platinum disc on the wall for Panpipes of the Andes, which he is responsible for bringing to the UK, incantations. So there was a kind of looking at niche markets, and so lots of different kinds of weird and wonderful stuff. But
that's very cool.
I thought, when you said you've got a last question, I thought you were going to ask me about the psychedelics, because on the Nudgestock session, I said that the only way to encourage creative thinking in a really short space of time was the best way to do it was lateral thinking, these techniques that force thought like that. But I said, but the only other way to do it is taking psychedelics, because there's all this really interesting research coming to the fore now around how psychedelics can connect the brain. And I think it'll be interesting to see if there's more with the microdosing trends in Silicon Valley, for example, whether they are getting truly becoming more creative because of it.
Yeah, that's it. That is interesting. I was just, and Tim knows this. I have a really eclectic thing in music, and one of mine is as heavy metal, and Disturbed is a heavy metal. And I was listening to David Damien, the lead singer, and he's talking about his process of writing lyrics and various different things. And he goes, "Yep, every single time I am just high as a kite." It's not psychedelics, but it's pot. And he goes, and he was talking about it, and he said what it does is it relaxes me. And so it makes these connections between, so it brings in some of this lateral thinking aspect, because he's talking about these connections between, the type of vocally styling that he's using different, and bringing that relaxation that allows his brain to make these strange connections between.
Pot is contains THC, which is psychoactive and a psychedelic, and can cause those kinds of mind states. But even things like they say getting into an alpha brainwave state, like a dreamlike state, like allows the brain to connect. I've often thought that I really would love to do a creative briefing at St Pancras train station and send the creatives off with a round day trip to York or somewhere, to have them sat on the train thinking about the problem that I've given them, because I've always found trains to be great spaces for lateral thinking. They are protected time, so much like a workshop, this is what we are here to do. You're not going anywhere, you're safe. Quite womb-like in the kind of motion, but you've also got stimulus outside the window, effectively random stimulus, stuff that you're not really, and so I love, if there's anyone out there who could do this study with me, love to do a study around brainwave state on trains. If I were running the train system as well today, I would be looking at, is there a product that you could offer passengers that is a bit like the sort of WeWork, the office space. If you have got space on these trains and capacity, and in the future when all things are good, I would really look at using it to a maximum advantage, and allowing those creative train spaces. I think I'd love to do a trans-Mongolian creative workshop. I think that would be, there you go, come out the other side of it with something really truly groundbreaking.
A WeWork trains whole business. There you go.
Yep, you heard it here first.
It is fascinating. So with all this music in your life growing up, my gosh, if your dad was the head of this label, there must have been a ton of music in your house. As an adult, how do you listen to music? And do you listen to music while you work?
I do not listen to music while I work, because I can't. I'm one of those people, I can't think unless I'm hearing it all in my head, and I'm too driven by music, and I like to sort of sing along. And but music can be enormously powerful to open up those new associations and connections. I mean, actually, just to go back to the psychedelic experience, what they've shown there, the work that's happening at Imperial University here in the UK, they are putting together specific playlists to help patients who are undergoing these clinical trials with psilocybin to help them recover from depression. And the music is critically important, because what the music does is, and this is very much the system one that we're talking about, the underlying emotional brain. Music without language speaks to that deep emotional brain, and the music effectively allows people to access memories, emotions, thoughts, other things that they need to maybe deal with to heal from trauma, for example. And it's the music that is really the portal to that. So I think it's very important kind of what you listen to, and like a friend of mine once said to me, I think I was going through a breakup, and she said, whatever you do, don't listen to your music. She said, it'll just take you further down this hole of, and she was talking about melancholy, sad music. And of course, sometimes we want to access that. Like I said, in the psychedelic experience, you want to access some bad or traumatic emotions in order to sort of purge yourself of them, perhaps. But in this case, she was saying you don't want to strengthen those that activation in the brain. You don't want to give it further energy. If anything, you want to do the opposite, which I think is actually quite good advice if you're going through a breakup, to listen to the most positive, even if it feels in some way wrong, to try and pull yourself out of it through that emotional access point. I as you can probably tell, I really, really love country music. Gretchen Peters is a big favorite of mine. I listen to probably quite a lot of country and anything else here and there.
So why country music? I gather that your dad's label had nothing to do with country music.
I don't think he had any country. He did bring Dory Previn to the UK. I think he put her. He brought her to the UK at some point. And I'm a big Dory Previn fan. I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but I think I think there's just a lot of poetry and a lot of heart and a lot of humanity in a very simple way. I mean, I'm a big fan of Loretta Lynn and her. The songs that she wrote. She's got one song called "The Pill," which is about going on the pill, and I just think, as a historical artifact, it's amazing to think how lucky women are today to manage their own reproductive health. And this song really brings that to life, because she's sort of saying, whoopee, I don't have to be the baby machine anymore. I'm going to go and get myself a mini skirt and all this sort of stuff. And it's just, I think, those kind of singers really capture some interesting emotions. And Gretchen certainly does that. I really admire her work.
That's very cool. And I also love that you are interested in sort of the classics too. Not just. Gretchen Peterson is certainly a more contemporary artist, but to kind of dig Loretta Lynn. I mean, the coal miner's daughter.
Oh, the coal miner's daughter. I was talking about it just the other day. Yeah. And that whole. I mean, although I sound very posh, I suppose my mother's family are from the industrial north of Britain. Very, very difficult. And my mother had a very difficult upbringing there, without money and without all the things some of the things that I was privileged enough to grow up with. But and it was a very hard time. She told me a story about getting her shoes stuck in the tar and not being able to replace them, and like these new shoes, and what a devastating thing this was for her and for her mother as well. And I feel it's important to sort of access some of that cultural memory, and the coal mining daughter does that. It's just like reminding us all where we came from and how it's not that all that long ago, really. Yeah.
Well, and I think country music has that ability, that ethos of that's the stories that they're telling. They're telling those stories of hardships and of heartbreak and of all of the human emotions that we often try to ignore or look away from. And I think that's some of the beauty of it.
And sometimes it's just like it's almost the sort of strangeness, I think, or the reality of talking about the pill, or talk about. There's a hell of a lot of songs about trucks. Let's face it, but
trucks, drinking, and my dog. There you go.
Yeah, Gretchen has sung a couple of songs about soldiers coming back from Iraq with PTSD, and these are things that really, really matter to people, are real, and are being captured in this way that can capture this emotion so powerfully. But I'm a big fan.
Well, we are grateful for your time, your thoughts, and this wonderful discussion about music. It's not often that I get to talk to someone who's the daughter of a guy that runs a label. I think that's pretty damn fascinating right there. So thank you.
Thank you. Tim, thank you, fellow primates. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you. We so appreciate your time and insight. So thanks. Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I groove on our recent discussion with Tara, have a free-flowing discussion on whatever else we think of, and whatever comes into our green hat or blue hat brains.
Oh, getting into the 6 hat thinking here, huh?
Or the yellow hat, or the orange hat, or the Matus hat. How many colors are of
6?
What are those 6 colors, by the way?
Red, black, yellow, blue, green, and
White.
Yeah.
White. Yes.
Yeah.
They're all interesting.
So do you want to start talking about Edward de Bono?
Sure. I mean, that was a big part, right? She's a big de Bono fan.
She really is, man.
Well, and to that degree, I appreciate de Bono's thinking, right? I appreciate lateral thinking. I appreciate this idea of trying to understand how we process information, and the hats are an easy way of trying to look at that. It was, I was researching some of the stuff back in the 90s, was helpful in a lot of the work that I was doing back then. And so really helped in kind of forming some of those initial concepts for me. So it worked out good.
I was later to the game. I didn't really come into the whole excitement around lateral thinking until the early 2000s. And with the great stories, the great examples that he gives about, like the man and his son are in a car accident and the father dies on the scene. The child's rushed to the hospital. When he arrives, the surgeon says, "Oh, I can't operate on that boy because he's my son." And our first go-to is, "Oh my gosh, how could that be?" Well, the surgeon was his mother, the surgeon.
Yeah.
Right. And yet we have this implicit bias, this natural thing that says, oh, if it's a doctor, if it's a surgeon, it's going to be a man. And we just have these societal norms. The other one that was my favorite, and I just have to mention this because I think it's so cool, is that 2 young men are applying for a job and they both look the same. They have the same last name, the same address, the same birthday, but they're not twins.
So what is it? How can they not be twins? Do they have the same DNA running through their
They have the same DNA even.
Wow. So how does that work?
They're 2 of triplets.
You sure that wasn't quadruplets?
Could have
Sextuplets?
Sextuplets. That's right.
Oh, there you go. But again, it focuses us on this idea that we need to. Our initial response on things sometimes goes to the immediate, and it is implied by the biases that we have. And lateral thinking, so the definition, right, is a manner of solving problems using an indirect and creative approach via reasoning that is not immediately obvious. So again, these are riddles that are there that aren't immediately obvious the answer, and you have to use some deductive and various different other types of reasoning in order to figure these out, and some lateral thinking on that, because if you just keep going down the same path, so I've lots of ways of thinking about this, but to get to the correct answer, you got to think a little differently around this.
And our lazy brains really struggle with putting the effort into making that happen. And the first thought that came to my mind when we were thinking about this, Kurt, was the media. Whatever media you're listening to, they're telling us a story for a specific reason. They're telling us not only what to think about, right, by how they're curating the list of stories that they're going to report on, they're also informing us how to think about it. And that is that's problematic when it comes to actually having, any society, a liberal democracy, especially, where people get to vote and supposedly have a real voice. How active are we really if we're not using some kind of, creative lateral thinking, at least from time to time, on big issues?
Well, you bring up a really good point. It's that lazy brain that we have, and this idea that we fall for those pieces of information that are available, vivid, as you said, when we are only getting information from one source, then we need to, it's problematic, because we need to be able to look at things from a variety of different things. I was just reading the other day, and I can't remember who was writing it, but this idea that, everybody, we often think of this from a political perspective, and we go, oh, conservatives only listen to Fox News. And yet, everybody, we have our bubbles. We have these little bubbles, particularly given today with social media and the way the algorithms work, that they only show us things that we like, because that gets us to stay on longer. And yet, the way that we actually get to good creative thinking, the way that we get to thinking about things from different perspectives, is to actually indulge in information that we don't like, in opinions that are different and contrary to ours. And only through looking at things from all sides of an issue can we really get a really good grasp of everything that is coming in. So those are some of the aspects that I think lateral thinking is really trying to tell us, that is to say, look, you can't look at, you got to take walk all the way around an issue. You got to look at it not just from the front, but you got to go and look at it from the side. You got to get behind it. You got to understand what are all the different aspects of it in order for you to really have a good perspective and to come up with a solution that is going to be both correct and creative.
Yeah. Well, you sent me an email recently from Ozan Varol.
Yeah.
That was a really cool. He had sort of like a little 3-piece approach that I thought was really cool.
Well, he talked about this idea of how much of our thinking is original anymore, right? How much of our thoughts are just regurgitating the ideas that others do. And he brought up this idea, and he thought, a lot of it really is. And I thought to myself, I'm going, crap, I think that's probably true. It's like we do this. And he had three things. And I don't necessarily agree with all three, but he was talking about, number one, think before you research. So he actually talked about writing things down, writing your own thoughts down before you go out and search on any topic, right? Question what you read is a second thing. Make sure you're looking at things through a very skeptical perspective and eyes. And 3, consume less and create more. So of all those 3, the one I have a little bit of difficulty with is this think before you research. And the reason is this concept of, we get anchored in. We get confirmation bias. So if I write something down about what I think on a topic, then I'm probably more likely to, when I start doing the research, to be looking for that research that confirms that pre-held belief that I have. And so I think there's some concern in writing that down, although I still think it's a really good idea. I think there's probably some caveats that we had, and you and I had exchanged some emails about this. One being about, well, can we think about it from an Annie Duke perspective of saying, hey, so I write this idea down, and how confident am I in this? Am I 80% confident in this? Am I 50% confident in this idea? At least to get it so that it doesn't become this black and white, that yes, this is the be all end all of this. And thus my mind will automatically go to some confirmation bias on it. Right. Yeah. So that was one thing.
Well, it makes me think about when I'm preparing to write songs for a record. I like to use a lot of divergent thinking, right? I like to expose myself to a lot of different ideas. And then when it gets into the actual writing of the songs or recording them, going into the studio and recording, then it gets very focused. And I don't listen to anything. I'm not listening to any music outside of what I'm in the process of creating at the point that I actually am going to record it. And like there's this focus that sort of happens naturally that when preparing to go into the studio that doesn't exist before that. Before I want a lot of information, and then when I'm actually sort of in the creation mode, then it's like, okay, turn off all the outside stimulus.
Well, we just interviewed Roy Baumeister the other day, and that's another episode that'll be coming out shortly. But one of the things that he said that I found really interesting when you were asking him about listening to music when you work, and again, he said yes, but it had to be music without words, because he said, when I'm working, I can't have anybody else's words in my head, right? I can't have anybody else's voice in my head, which I'm paraphrasing there. But that gets into this, right? It gets into these other people's words are in our heads, and are we just regurgitating those? Or, as you said, when you're in that zone, are you so focused in on what you're doing? So I think there are ways, and I think that's really true. And I think lateral thinking is a way of coming at it that De Bono brings a perspective on, to get us to think, not just regurgitate. So,
wow, nice wrap on that, man. That was really, you just beautifully brought that full circle.
Well, there you go. That's what we do. We bring things full circle here, just like a baby spinning right round, so.
Is that the tee up for talking about babies in the Borough?
Oh, babies in the Borough. Wow, my gosh. There you go. Which was another interesting part of Tara's conversation, right? And it's so fascinating because I've heard the story, from Rory and others. It's been publicized for a number of years now, but this was the generation story. This was the look at the history of how this came about. I read the summary, the Cliff Notes version of this before, and this was a deep dive into it, which was just fascinating. And the work, and I loved her concept of, what was the paper that she was reading? The Shopper, right? Which was the initial piece. And again, it goes back to these other getting inspiration from things that aren't necessarily, directly associated with the concept that we're trying to work on.
Yeah, and then she connects it with this paper from 2009 about what she called, cute matters, but it's actually called baby schema in infant faces induces cuteness perception and motivation for caretaking in adults. So I do prefer cute matters.
Yeah.
But she connects it with this paper that at the time was like a couple years old.
Yeah, and then with the artist Ben Eine and putting all that together with the London Riots. So all these disparate things coming together to create this idea of, all right, we have these metal shutters that go down every night around this area, and let's put something on those shutters that will hopefully reduce some of the crime. Yeah. And let's use babies and use good artists and use babies from the local area. And just fascinating the way that whole concept came about.
So you and I live in Minneapolis, where George Floyd was murdered. And I think that the city, the community in general has done a wonderful job of bringing the image of George Floyd to the forefront. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are posters of George Floyd with the I can't breathe or say his name, or some kind of reminder on lots and lots of shops around. The co-op where Katie and I get our groceries has a huge mural painted outside just of George Floyd's face. Those are great reminders. And yet at the same time, we're suffering from a terrible crime wave. So I don't know if there's any direct thing there, but I like being reminded of George Floyd with the image all the time. And I guess this gets me to the question of, why aren't more cities using a babies in the borough approach in their higher crime areas? Why haven't they gone to the shop owners and said, give us the pictures of your kids and we're going to paint them on your shop so that there's this direct connection to these beautiful baby faces, to hopefully deter crime.
Yeah, you have to wonder, and some of it is probably just physical, right? Where are they going to put those pictures? What are the, what's the real estate ability to do that? Others, you got to look and think about, all right, how does that parlay into, who owns the shop versus who owns the building versus others. So there's a lot of logistical problems that come with that. But still, to your point, I agree. I mean, you think about the impact that can have, and it's a simple impact or a simple process to do it, relatively low cost. And if it can make an impact that is not only reducing crime, but creating a more vibrant area to be in, is just a whole positive across the board. But nobody's ever said that city governments are the be all end all of forward thinking. So
we don't even have to speak specifically to city governments. I think we can just talk about government in general.
and the idea of actually using behavioral science research to do some good, but we digress. All right.
So I don't know. So anything else?
I think we've covered a lot. So I would just encourage listeners to hang on, because we have a bonus track coming up right after this.
Hey Groovers, this is Tim with our bonus track for our episode with Tara Austin. Our discussion with Tara reminded us of some important facts about what motivates human behavior. First, she shared the important project she did with Ogilvy Change on the babies in the Borough. Now, on the heels of the London Riots in 2011, she wanted to see how a paper she'd read a few years earlier might apply to reducing crime in a particular neighborhood in England. With the help of a master street painter, Ben Eine, the team gathered photos of babies from locals in the neighborhood and had them rendered on the security doors and shutters of the businesses. The data they gathered lacked a control group, which rendered it unusable for academic purposes. However, they saw declines in theft, vandalism, and public urination year over year with the addition of the babies' faces to the shops. This illustrates the powerful effect that priming and prompting can have on our behaviors, especially when the prompts are images and not words. Secondly, Tara's crush on Edward de Bono was fantastic to talk about, especially when it came to lateral thinking. Too often, our thinking is heavily guided by outside forces, the media, our social networks, and just plain laziness. From time to time, and especially on important topics and themes in our lives, employing lateral thinking can help us with our general level of decision-making. Better decision-making is likely to lead to greater happiness in our lives, so what is there to lose? Now it's time for our groove idea for the week. When you reflect on Tara's comments about the Babies in the Borough project, what are the images that you have around you most of the time? You're probably still working from home, and I'd like you to think about taking a deliberate inventory of the images that you have in your workspace. What do you see around you when you're sitting at your desk? You might have some inspirational word art, or more importantly, what images are in view when you're sitting in your workplace? Now ask yourself this question. What impact are those images having on you? Are they creating the right set of prompts and primes that enable you to live the happiest and most productive life you can? Jot us a note about what you experience and what changes you've made or not made. We'd love to hear about it. So from the world headquarters of behavioral grooves, we wish you a good week and to keep on grooving.